was very, very, very kind of all of you to come. And just curious, I'm a teacher, I can't help it. How many of you are photographers or do it as a, enjoy do it? And how many of you have ever been to Bushwick? Okay, and how many people have heard about it, how it's changing or it's so hot right now? Okay, well, thank you. And just curious, any current or former school teachers in the audience? Okay, so you'll relate deeply to this. Okay. So this is a body of work that was buried for many decades. Here we are, this is Bushwick, which was part of Brooklyn. And if you do a Google for Bushwick, I'm shocked, you don't find it anywhere else. It's totally Americana. You don't find a Bushwick in Europe or in any other country that comes up. This is it, the old Boswick, the heavy woods. And it's on the corner of Williamsburg, Greenpoint. Where I worked was the edge of Ridgewood, Queens, the last stop out. And this is it, an overview map of the neighborhood within the last 20 years. Who here remembers where they might have been July 14th, 1977? Yeah, where were you?
I was in South America.
Okay, where were you?
I was traveling with my band somewhere throughout the United States.
Okay. Does anyone know exactly what night that was?
Was that a blackout?
That was the blackout, that's right. And yep, that blackout. It's not the first one, because the first one I remember was in the 60s. It was the big one. And I remember I was actually with somebody in the audience here, and we were actually getting ready to go to Studio 54. We were invited to go to a private party with Stephen Rubel and his partner, and we were bicycling down to no lights, and we showed up in our costume, we couldn't go in. The party was canceled. And the next day, what I saw, which if you were in New York or maybe in the country, all you heard about looting and fires and chaos, and the centerpiece of this was a neighborhood called Bushwick, Brooklyn. And I just remember pictures like this being on the newsreels of looting going on for days and Broadway being burned. Then let's flash forward, 1981. Honestly, I needed a full-time job. I was working part-time with teaching, and I was on a list, and a paper came in the mail, file number 489361. You can either report to duty immediately for an interview, or your name goes back on the list. That's going down to the bottom. So I showed up on the day to be interviewed, and I got out of the train, and I looked around, and honestly, the first thought I had was, the other art teacher must have been killed. Why was there an opening the week before Christmas? And this place, it looked like a combination of Beirut at the time and Hiroshima. And walking down the street, everything was boarded up, closed up, and there was one standing building up to the right, and it was a school, and it looked like a prison. And here I was. It's like, well, this is interesting. I went for the interview. I did get the job. It was very funny. It was like a MASH episode because it looked like total chaos what I was entering. And he was the principal, and he was saying, oh, well, he was an art teacher too, being a principal, and what he was doing was hand ruling his calendar. And I thought, well, this is going to be very interesting. And I took the job. And the spring before, in June, on the last day of another teaching job I had my beloved Narita Graflex, a 2 1/4. It was my best friend. And the last day of school, I was photographing a party, and someone came into the room. No one else saw him but me. He looked at me and he says, I have a gun, give me your camera. I gave him my camera. I didn't ask to see the gun, I gave him my camera. And so that experience was with me, and I was definitely, this was a much dicier area. Let's put it this way, I was working in East New York, and when I heard about a job in Bushwick seemed more dangerous at the time. But when I was walking up and down the streets, to go to the subway and go back home again, I thought it was incredible what I was witnessing, what I was seeing. And probably like many of you anyway, I'm a habitual photographer. So I bought a little point and shoot camera. The kind, it was like the first Canon short shot, opened and closed like a bar of soap. Bought the cheapest film that was available, put in the camera and started taking pictures. Because the same reason you take photographs as well, for many, many reasons, whether image makers, image hoarders, or because I've never seen anything like it before, and here I am. And I was there for 14 years, so the pictures that you're going to see, a lot of people say, oh, you know, everybody looks so cheerful, and it doesn't look so bad, or I photographed things that were positive to me. I did not photograph the crack files and the heroin and the junkies. I was there for the long term. So these are my memories. Come on. They're in categories of landscapes and still lives. This was actually your teacher. There was a April 17th snowstorm in 1982. Do you remember it? Because it happened the day before. If you were a teacher, you know it because we got the day off. It's very rare snowstorms, and it happened right before Easter Passover break. So this is the view from a classroom window on a freak snowstorm. Literally, my room had no windows. But when you substitute for another teacher, I brought the little camera, and this is a view from a social studies classroom. And there were actually people. Would you, if you had a comment, would you say a little louder? I didn't. If you.
That was me. I said there's a person on the fire escape.
Yes, very, very observant. There's a person at a fire escape, right? And it's also it doesn't show up here. There's actually a flag. It looks like a Puerto Rican or flag in that window. Literally right across the street from it. But almost everything is two or three blocks radius from the school, walking up and walking down. And we'd look out the window, and there would be kids you'll see later on playing hooky on top of those rooftops. It literally looked like you can go like this, and the building would go down. Sometimes it would be standing one day, next day it would be down. Then there was I noticed purposeful destruction. Sometimes things would just collapse, but obviously there was something going on. There were people coming in, taking down these exquisite buildings, because they really were exquisite buildings. If you look at them, they're limestones, brownstones, and this wasn't burned. You'll see later on there's clothing in there. It wasn't burned. But the neighborhood was abandoned practically. And yet someone would go and have, this is a senatorial campaign. The nerve. But everywhere, like there's somebody sitting, in Little Red, there's somebody sitting, hanging out there. When you've been through something and you come back, it wasn't like I was been there. It wasn't like I was at a hurricane or earthquake, but it was someplace I experienced for over a decade. And when you see other photographs of disasters, usually they're natural disasters or that happen, they're reminiscent. I said, oh, I took that picture. I remember that. The fire escapes. I always liked to have, like, there'd be one building occupied and most around the building it was unoccupied, but yet people broke back in because it was also the crack epidemic was happening. So not only shooting galleries, people were going in and doing all sorts of drugs in these buildings. So breaking their way back into boarded up buildings. Or taking down. And I realized, oh, you wouldn't see this now, because if somebody, here it almost looks like a mass grave. Now, if somebody was doing excavation work, they would close it up. But it seemed like it'd be like one or two people coming and taking down the building, taking away the rocks. And it would be just clothing hanging around and fire hydrants running all the time. All weather. This is one of the last photographs I took of this series. It was in '88 because I was like, oh, I just going to do this forever. But then I'd be there, and then the next morning, this building collapsed. It was ongoing all the time.
When you were walking to work, were you often the only person on the street? When you walked to work,
Yes.
were you often the only person on the street?
When I walked to work, was I often the only person on the street? Yes. When I walked to work, I was almost always the only person on the street, and when I did see people and I wanted to photograph them, I asked them. But it was very empty. The street itself was a few blocks from the epicenter of the fires, from the blackout, and then there was something called the All Hands Fire. I'll show you the spot later on, where like maybe 2 months after the blackout, the same summer, some youth were in a building, an old factory building, and they were playing with matches, and they didn't know that there were gas tanks on the bottom of the building, and the building blew up and set that building on fire, and many around. It was a knitting factory, and it was called the All Hands Fire. Up until 9/11, there were more fire department. Modern Fire is the biggest fire department fire disaster in modern FDNY history until 9/11. They came from all over to put it out. So everything around it was demolished, and people were moving out at a rapid rate. But yet, down the block from what the abandoned building would be this scene to me, it's like a Hopper movie, Edward Hopper painting. Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Everybody's doing their business. But yet here's that same building, and somebody by himself is taking down another place and probably carrying away a copper pipe. And there was a lot of people would go into buildings and strip out the metal because it's very worthwhile, valuable. And yet here there are campaigns for different elected officials going on, but something very nice, to this day, some of the people who were in charge of the local government there are still in charge. And I give them credit, because obviously what was going on and what went on was some very good community planning. And he's a very smart guy. He started collecting the toilet bowls and making a business. And that's the school I worked in right there, the brown brick building. And obviously, things were happening. Yes?
How large was the student body of the school?
The student body of the school at the time, I'd say, was approximately 1,500. The school still exists.
Right, did attendance drop during those years, or stay fairly steady?
Did attendance drop during those years? This was a school that was built. I was probably the first graduating class was there 2 years before I went there. And it was opened and built, and it was never open with a C of O. So there were hanging wires everywhere. In fact, I started doing collaborative work. I got a grant to set up a photography program with my students, a drop-in prevention program, and we photographed all the things that were wrong with the school, because it shouldn't have been opened. It was dangerous. That piece ended up being in the Whitney Biennial.
That's bad.
And so, like I said, it would be a lot, nowadays, someone has a snow plow, they're out, they've got a business there. If you had your own plow and you could wreck a building, you were in business. People would be picking bricks and going through the bricks. Yes, and when I saw the 9/11 picture, I said, I remember this. When you have things, anyway, I would take these pictures and put them in little boxes, put them away, but they're still in your memory bank. Yes?
That looks like government low-income housing building. When was that built?
Okay, she said it looks like a low-income housing building. That building over there is part of New Hope Gardens. It was one of the first, I think I should call it subsidized housing. And that was more of a senior community. And this area, in the early 80s, I would say, No, if I was there in 82, late 70s, somewhere between 77 and 82 when I was there. How's
So
that?
before the fires or after?
After the fires. That was that was like the first sign of rejuvenation. And this area, when I was going down, and this was, they were taking it down, I applied to do a community garden there with my students, and then I found out that it was slated for a housing project, and that ended up being called Hope Gardens. And I wasn't really there at night. I mean, I was going to work and coming back, open school night. So coming back, and yep, people still working, climbing up, taking things down. It's like a stage set. And here's the new housing going up. And and I say to credit, and I think that's what, when you hear about these housing projects, and I don't know, it was Philadelphia, the one that was compared to Penn South that was demolished lately, because the scale was wrong. These buildings were built to the scale of Bushwick. And I'm not totally surprised it became an artist neighborhood, because I was stunned by how beautiful the lighting was and the low scale buildings. So to make something a lower scale makes it more manageable and more livable. But remember those tanks? And you see the City Core building, you're really not that far away, 17 minutes. And these are all views from the classroom buildings, from the classroom windows. I've been doing it now, you'll see more now and then, because I'm going back 30 years later. Then, now. Then, he didn't see anyone who looked like himself in those pictures. At the time, and I am I'm an art educated person, I go, I'm seeing a Walker Evans in front of my eyes. So, the live poultry is still going on, this live poultry markets. A kosher butcher. There were very few places to eat, or we went to school, you were in there all day, and you had a sign out to leave. But yet the little businesses like the Paraguas. And a little boy, maybe I'd love to run into this one. I bet you he's a future executive. And he was really determined to do the right thing. A day in school, that's another. I have 31 years of inside of schools. That's probably a very special body of work I have, and I continue it because now I supervise art teachers through NYU, and it's an interesting world. But there, children, what do children do? They model what they see. So there were fires in the lockers. You knew you had a good bulletin board if nobody torched it. And yes, there were problems with weapons. And children, anger. I don't know who would do this, but it's anger. Teacher, friend. It was not an easy job. Science teacher. But yet, of course, why does anyone stay in teaching? It really is, in the long run, it's a fabulous profession. And you do make change, and you do help people become who well, if they're on their path, you're just cheering them along. You're the best cheerleader in the world when you're a teacher. You're a cheerleader. And I'm waiting. I keep on showing this one because I want to see where Miss Dixon is today. I recently connected with a writer, and I'll tell you more about it later, who grew up in Bushwick, and he or she ended up going on to getting a full scholarship to a private boarding school with Wellesley, on to Columbia, and she's an author. And she helped me curate this next show where it's collaboration. And when she looked at this picture, she says, "A strike zone." I said, "A what?" "A strike zone. You know, when you play handball or kickball, where you go for the targets." I go, "Vanessa, that means condemned." And she said, "You know, you find joy, you find play wherever you are." And I said, "What did they teach you in Ivy League school?" You know, she really thought this was a target for play to this day. Maybe this was the first day I was photographing, because I knew I had to take these pictures.
That little kid is smoking.
Yes, is there someone smoking? Yes, it's a young boy, he's smoking. He might be in 7th grade. Here we go, a little rooftop hooky. You look out the window, you go, hey, get off the rooftops. It's the middle of the day. And there'd be people at the corners, people selling drugs, kids playing hooky, throwing things out the window to each other, and then a constant moving out. But it's the middle of school day. They're playing hooky on the roof. Could be a stage set, right? It's just fake. And boys giving each other, in that neighborhood there were the Bloods and the Crips, and they had different handshakes. But I'm the kind of person who's a safety first. You know, Pumiso, can I take your picture? And sure. But I'm glad I got that, the shake. And it seems like almost absurd kind of situations. You know, what's all the sand doing in this building? Is that a way of putting out a fire? You know, what was it? Broken glass. But all the kids, their clothes were just so. They'd make fun of you because your clothes were not as nice as theirs were. It had such pride in their appearance and carrying themselves. She was a junior high school kid smoking. So that was the block where I spent my life. When I go back there now, I feel like it's my time portal. I get out in that street and I'm like, and you know, a portal, and I transgress into time, and and things happen. El Faro supermarket. The Myrtle Avenue stop, and some parochial school girls having a drink. And yet through all the destruction, people live, love, have kids. This is Halloween. This is a little toddlerhood. And I was thinking, well, the mom, I said, she must have been new to the country because Halloween was, you did not want, very few kids came to school on Halloween because they thought they would be beat up by another gang. If you wore red, the Bloods would get you. If you're this, that, or you'd be pelted with eggs. And so it just showed that this mom came from another country, was new to a neighborhood because you would not put on red. It was a gang war signal, even on your toddler. But that's what I love. Kids are kids, right? It's like little rascals. And the neighborhood there were some of the, quote, old timers. You know, it was a German, Jewish, Italian, Polish neighborhood. And a lot of these kids are my students, so I knew them. You know. This is one in Brooklyn. I had a show in the Brooklyn Historical Society. That's what brought things out of the box in 2007. And because a teacher, a history teacher, saw a proposal to have to put on an exhibit about the history of, and he wanted to do a piece about Bushwick. And he started inquiring and finding out there aren't any photographs of this period. And just a few from the newspaper. It's almost like a forgotten era. And his colleague, John Napoli, said, find Meisler. She was always taking pictures. And so he contacted me and I started going through the boxes. And this is the one that the Brooklyn Historical Society kept for their collection. Because it's just such a New York scene. I changed this woman's life, that she looks at her whole history, that everywhere that she saw something was condemned, she saw it as a game. And that's a very positive outlook, if you think about it. The kids saw it as an opportunity to play. The sign for a building being condemned was a target. And here's a kid wearing a hat, carrying a rod. Probably the rod was protection, as well as taking a tire off. Joy of a new state. So here's I had a show. Okay, so I showed some of this work in 1984 when I first started teaching. I'm a member of a group called Professional Women Photographers, and there's people in the room here. I consider it my Girl Scout troop. I've been a member for so long. I've made some of my very, very best friends, and they used to have a space at Photographers Unlimited, and I was invited to have a show, and I said, let me show school and surroundings. It was a brand new concept for me to even be working full time, and I was seeing great things. And at the time I had these slides, and I had Chrome prints made, which was more than my paycheck for the year. And then I knew I couldn't even afford to do that anymore. I started painting onto photographs, doing different things. So it's like, who could afford to do that? And I put them away, and I still took pictures because that's what we do. And then I was had the show in 2007 in the Brooklyn Historical Society, and then I was invited through the network of PWP, Professional Women Photographers. I was invited to have a show at Soho, to submit to have a show at Soho Photo Gallery as a guest. And I said, no, the work I want to show is this Bushwick work, because I started printing it myself. I'm a printer's daughter. My daddy owned Excel Printing Company. For the Brooklyn Historical Society, I had it output. I scanned the pictures, I gave them to somebody else, they printed it, but it wasn't my aesthetic. I realized it doesn't matter. I know these are funky little pictures, and they're blurry because they were taken with a plastic camera and a crummy lens, but to me, I kept on seeing more images that struck me, and I made it my little obsession, my big obsession, to learn how to print them the way I wanted to see them. And I had a show in December, which actually received a lot of feedback for a little show. And I wanted to reach the Bushwick community. And I did search, and I found a website called Bushwick Daily, a photography-based blog. So I sent them a notice about the show. And they said, okay, sounds great, we'll send a reporter. And they did. They came to the opening, and a woman did a little audio-visual slideshow and wrote up a piece. And she was in the middle of graduate school. A lot of these people are very young, and it went up the last week of the show. 2 months later, in February, I get an email from a stranger. And the line says, I'm in your picture. It jolted me. I opened it up, and like, I'm the picture of jumping rope. That's me. I got a letter from this little girl. She was now a teaching artist. She's a writer. She's published, the one who went on to go to Columbia, the one who thought the strike zone meant it was a place to play. She grew up down the block from where I taught, and I happened to photograph her family, and she happened to tell this classroom that she was a visiting writer, that I grew up in the neighborhood and looked much different when she was there. And the teacher said, oh, you should look up this person's work. This is very interesting. And she goes off into the office and puts it immediately on, and the images play, because it's like a flash movie. And she said her heart, like just jolted. But then we did meet, and we hit it off and decided, I said, I want to be a part of Bushwick Open Studios. I want to find a spot. We decided, like, on the spot, that we would try to collaborate, because even my art, I read something, she wrote a story, she sent it to me, and then she wrote my artist statement. We both thought we took words from each other. We saw things similarly. My photographs tell her childhood. Her words tell the story behind working with the kids that I did. So it's quite magical. And then just last week we met again, and she was talking about how, having the opportunity to dance and going to an international dance festival in junior high school, to Turkey. I said, you went with Mr. Berrios. She goes, how do you know? I said, I remember Mr. Berrios. I work with Mr. Berrios. I photographed your dance troupe. I remember this. It's very odd. So life is magical. And here are kids in the same block, other direction, playing. They're not just playing baseball there. A lot of moving trucks. But then also the teams, the spirit. Remember, subways look like that, and making do, playing. This was the first picture I took. The other one was like maybe the second one on the roll. This was the first picture I took when I finally got the little camera. And this is the schoolyard. There was no place to play. Every playground was demolished. And yet here today, you see people with shirts, Bushwick Pride. That's what people say, what's the difference? I say a lot of it's the same, but the empty lots aren't filled with garbage. And people are actually proud to say they're from Bushwick, and it's more diverse. And here, like, running with youth and playing, and this guy's, is he taking apart or finding pieces in a car? A family picnic. And I'm putting this in the show again because I want these people to find me. Because I remember that she went to the school and the boy went to the school, and I would love to know how they are today, because what a positive outlook they have. Who knows? And yet they would play in the garbage. Because you have to play. I think it's nature. The big bus, I was a semifinalist to redesign this bus station. So I did go back in the mid-90s because I was picked to do a proposal for this train station, excuse me. Yes?
What is the name of that station?
Would you repeat that?
The train station?
What is that train station? That is the L train, and that's the Myrtle Wyckoff stop. There is another train that goes there, but because it's not my train, I will never remember that number. It's the L train.
Those seats, were they from a train or something? The seats that she was sitting in right up front?
No, this is a furniture. Is asking, are these seats from the train? No, this is a furniture store.
Ah,
And I just recently photographed a vendor there. I go back, and you're gonna see, it's almost like I have reenactments happening. You're gonna see some of them later. It's like something's happening. It's like almost like a time warp, and the same thing is happening again in front of my eyes. But things are running. And it was always actually meeting up with Vanessa and talking about, Vanessa the writer, she said it always smelled like bread. That's right, it looked like garbage, but it smelled like bread. There must have been a fresh bread factory every day, and that was a very nice smell. This car service is still in business, Natasha Car Service. They took down this wonderful mural though. And here, these are the trolley cars, trolley tracks. And this was a fire, someone probably didn't want to take a test. They set a fire in the school. And we were next to the firehouse, and it was called, the nickname for the firehouse is the House of Pain. And it's for their cooking. And it's actually the newest firehouse now in the city. They made it Michael's Graves Firehouse. And that's the first time I had an official show in Bushwick, which was around 2 years ago, because they were having a commemoration and they wanted my pictures up there. Imagine what it would cost to run this car today. Moving, a lot of moving. It had Palmetto Street had the largest vacancy rate, the most intense vacancy rate in all the city. I read it in some report somewhere. Refrigerator car, very handy. But that was that always mystified me to get out one day and like, this wasn't here yesterday. Did it come down the night and like 4 tons fall from the sky and it'd be there? It was a dumping zone. People must have been crushing cars elsewhere and dumping them there here. But for everyone dumped, somebody else will find spare parts. Or, isn't that amazing that people do that? They make a car and have it come out a gem. It's talent. It wasn't there the day before. and all of a sudden there's this wall of cars. But kids still have to go to school, and they're wearing a sign, you know, safety now, school's in session. It seemed a little odd. And biking, and that's why I noticed going back now with the hipsters are moving, and a lot of people are really, a lot of bikes are very popular out in Bushwick. And it always has been. It's like maybe a new community has moved in, integrating the rest, but it's still the same community, and we still the same people, and riding your bikes is a great way to get around. But in any situation, you know, what really keeps us going, or what comes in to fill a lot of voids. Brooklyn is the city of churches, right? He was taking a Polaroid of his family, the pastor. This is a father and son, minister and his son. I wonder if the little boy became a minister. And yet showing to people who grew up in the neighborhood, first thing they said was, church people. I said, how did you know? That's how church people dress. And this is actually under the the Broadway, the Broadway elevated trains. So it's very dark above. And that was the area that most of the looting and the fires happened. And so it was a little, you know, like it must have been a lazy, I probably had like an after school meeting, so I'd take a walk up to Broadway. And those ladies, every street corner, bringing you deliverance. I did photograph a synagogue, but it's in Ridgewood. It's over the edge, and it was 1990, so it wasn't in the 80s. There is not an existing synagogue now. However, on Flushing Avenue, where I'm having the show, Hobbit House has moved in. So, well, that's a change. One of my students worked in that funeral home. That was her business, her job after school, helping with the bodies. I wonder where she is. I'd love to find her. Some of the kids I know I've kept in touch with. They've kept in touch with me. And this is obviously probably a policeman's funeral, someone important. But then I had a car, so I was doing drive-bys. It's like, what do I do with all these pictures? It's like, I'm taking all these pictures and I can never show them. I can't afford, at the time, $100 a pop to make Seabricombe prints of them. I have a background as an illustrator, so I started taking the reject prints and painting on them. And so I took a boat and I painted what I saw, and it turned into this is pre-Photoshop, this is acrylic paint on the photographs. That red zone, that building, that was where the all hands fire took place. And it's where I wanted to do a garden lot, and I actually did a proposal. And to me, he looked like Sherlock Holmes. And at the time, Iran-Contra hearings were going on, so I painted little miniature insects carrying information. When I looked at buildings like this, to me, they're like a honeycomb. You imagine who lived there, who loved there, who had children there, who did their homework there. There was so much life in like an abandoned honeycomb. And I thought, doesn't everyone see that? So I turned it into a honeycomb.
When did Bushwick start going downhill?
Would you repeat that?
When did Bushwick start going downhill?
When did Bushwick start going downhill? Some people might say it's when people who are non-Caucasian moved in. That might be somebody's answer. Another person's answer might be when the 70s. White flight, you've heard of that, you know? Going into suburbs. Another person, when redlining, when insurance people would not, or mortgage lenders would devalue homes and not give them? When did it start going downhill? But this was, how about when was an epic point? I'd say the blackout. That it was a turning point when the Bronx was burning and Bushwick was burning. Who knows? That's an interesting question, right? But it's full of, and that actually became my curriculum for the school, showing the kids that they live in a great neighborhood with so much history. Mayors lived here, opera houses were here, a lot of famous actors and actresses. There are mansions there. You know, it really has a fantastic history, and that became my my curriculum through art. Or like Deborah would say, oh yeah, the 80s were a rough, late 70s and 80s were a rough time. I don't know. But would be one, maybe the forgotten era, the forgotten when nobody paid attention was the worst point. This little boy, maybe he was across the street, he went to Art and Design High School. And I turned into a rat race. In the exhibit, this is in the Brooklyn Historical Society, somebody came in, broke the window, and took a $100 bill. They're pretty wild.
You didn't paint that? It wasn't like a Tom Floyd, the $100 bill?
Yes,
real?
this is a real $100 bill,
Oh, I thought
right?
you
It was a rat race, Eliza Rat, and somebody covered up the cameras, broke it to piece, and to take a $100 bill. So I've come back. Coming back, when I first came back in 2007 to work on the show to the Historical Society, I get on the subway and I'm going like, you know, who are these people? Where did they come from? You know, it was definitely a different population was spattered amongst people who look like Manhattanites were there. They were so something's different. And I started realizing it looks the same as a few years ago, but there was something changed, and I literally felt like Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life. And you wake up the next day and like there was like a funny dream, and it's all back to normal. It was a air of vibrancy, and I noticed it. And so I'm going back just because 30-year anniversary, why not? And I'm looking for the similarities and differences, making diptychs. I do see, and I'll show you, I do see reenactments. Photography is spiritual, right? It really does have a spiritual nature to it. And very Americana that I see in Bushwick. It's something that's a very warm feeling that I've always had. I mean, I stayed there for a long time, not because I was a national award-winning educator. I could go anywhere. I really did, I enjoyed it. And so here's, you know, now and then, it's not the same spot, but there is a difference, right? Recycling. This one flipped me out a little bit because it's almost, is there a Bushwick stride? I didn't see it happening, but as soon as I opened the picture on my computer, you know, here's 30 years later, it's almost the exact same motion that these kids gave to me. And these are the kind of things that I see happening. Or is it your eye and you catch these, and this is how you document your life or how people react with you. You know, photography has mystery. The graffiti has changed. I didn't notice till 30 years later that it's his little bag with some kind of herb on it. I don't remember smelling it. Yet this hasn't changed. This is 2011. This is 1981. And it's definitely that look. And that the phone, did it come out of outer space? The phone booth is there. And there are lottery tickets. And he was just pleased as punch to be photographed, because I think never in my life has any stranger come up to me and asked, may I take your picture? And I do believe that when I ask people, they perceive that I'm noticing something about them that they like in themselves.
So which
Now.
Now, okay. It's interesting, 'cause
Then.
I think in a few of them,
It's hard to tell.
it's hard to tell.
Yes, and that's what I think is very magical. It's like we don't change. And it's not that long ago. It's only 30 years ago. And we're all human beings, and there are ways that confident men stand, or players stand, or kids express themselves. Then, now. I mean, maybe thanks to Spike Lee, so people started wearing shirts that say Brooklyn, right? But you can see, call your mom, this is now, the arts district. And then, but the hold on. This one, I was like, oh my God. Then and now. Did this boy grow? I mean, is this a natural pose? Is this a reenactment of Iwo Jima? I mean, this is what I see happening when I take my pictures. Like, I have that picture already. I see the same things again.
The houses then had a lot of asbestos siding, and now the new one, I've noticed all the old houses had the asbestos.
Yes, and you notice that the siding looked like asbestos or whatever that stuff is that rips very easily. Yes. Yes, it's some very funky siding. It's not aluminum, it's something that's almost like a rubber. It probably is. It's comforting, right? How many, teacher, how many, you have like, oh, your asbestos blanket is right in the corner of the room, and kids would take it out and play with it, right? Yeah, kids like to roll. Roller skates, bicycles been popular for generations. One year there used to be something called the Disney American Teacher Award, and I was selected as one of the top 3 art teachers in the country. And they sent a film crew out to film me. And I had this photography program with kids, and we'd go out, and he said, well, let's take the classroom out, and you could take pictures of the neighborhood. I said, oh, that sounds like a great idea, let's do it. And as we went out with the film crew, some gangs of youth came around and were running after the film crew trying to steal their equipment or borrow it. And they went back in, and after that for years I would get care packages from that teacher, that producer. He felt so sorry. But you'd be there one day, this is the schoolyard, the next day there's a bed there. And obviously someone had camped out there. And here's a bed nowadays. It's a different kind of thing going on, right? When you see them in lice protection. Then, the dog car. Now, but I do actually have one of the same street with a car and a bus, almost in the exact same position. The lighting is not perfect, but it was like, there's a car right there, but it's a Mercedes, and the bus is in the same place, and I'm in the same spot. But I do know it wasn't a good photograph, but still it hit me. Things are so bad, still in my garbage can. Note the boy in the back going here. This is within inches of the same spot. And it's still like, there's a boy walking backwards from school and someone coming forward. But this time, the dogs have leashes and they're pampered, and the kid is so proud of his school. And you wouldn't be caught dead wearing your pajamas outside then. Now it's style. There are ties in it, there's clothing in it. It wasn't burned down. You know how much a limestone building would go for now in any neighborhood. And the never-ending running water. And here's the pink carriage now. Twins in pink. I go back and I say to this woman, excuse me, I take a picture of your children because I photographed pink girls 30 years before. She said, sure. It's like, do twins always wear pink? And Deborah noticed, this is actually, she's a distant relative of mine, Ruth Gruber, and she's a photographer and a writer, and she just doing, there was actually a book, she grew up on Harmon Street in Bushwick and wanted to go back. And she said, Harmon's Harmon, now it's spelled A-N, but I am positive she's right, because you can even see her letters. And so she wanted to go back to where she grew up. And we went, and here she is 96, she just turned to, she's 100 and still rocking. But photographer, she didn't have her first solo show till she was 85, okay? And this to me was a real evidence of change. Up the block there was something called the Bushwick Theater. It was amazing. It was arcade, it used to be an opera house. Caruso played there. The mayors of New York lived there. Mae West performed there. It was really amazing. And I did a history piece with my students about it, where we made a model of the Bushwick Theater in a movie. And then we went and photographed. I got right before I transferred to a different situation, I got a view camera, Funsburg view camera, and we photographed the Bushwick Theater. And it was, when I inquired about it, it was some junkies would hang out in there, and it would be astronomically expensive to renovate it, but look at this gorgeous building. But when I came back a few years later to do the study for this train station, I saw a change happening.
Is it still up?
This is then. This is in 91. No, excuse me. This is 89. It was before. I didn't have, everything's in the 80s here. And then it was closed up, and they took off the marquee. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Something's going on. Beautiful, beautiful structure. Now it's a school. Acorn High School for Social Justice. Doesn't have the best reputation, right? It's going through changes, the school, but it's such a cheerful to see this. It's hard to start a new school. It's not just a building, it's a culture.
Charter school?
No. It's a small public high school. And yes, there are others moving in. The little artsy people, the hipsters, doing their own grander graffiti. And of course they put up, when I first saw like a health food store in Bushwick, are you kidding? But they're here. And this is on Bogart Street, which has become the epicenter of the art world there. And here is the building going up where it used to be the Rheingold, it's a word I have trouble saying, breweries. There used to be beer manufacturers all through the Bushwick area. And Rheingold was one of them, and now there's like a Rheingold Gardens. Is this construction going on?
You had a previous picture where it was two guys hanging out, and one of the guys had a Rheingold.
Yes. Very good. Very observant. Yes. The other man does, I call them dudes. They were drinking beer. This is this mansion has been owned by the same woman. She's a retired librarian from her family, from a local school, and she looks quite preserved, because I found out she's probably 20 years older than I think she was. She looks really great, and she keeps the house just so, and it's been the family all along. And yet you can walk down the block, and it's still with Mansion Row, and it's still this very funky feeling.
What's that now?
Over here, when was this?
This is now.
This, if you want to say 2008 is now, but it's now. And that's now as well. But it's looked that way all along. It's very special. She was unique, one of the few. And yet, and the same problems, looking for affordable housing. I am one of those very lucky New Yorkers. I live in Penn South. I live in a socialist co-op. I mean, it's a model for everywhere. We need to, I believe, there needs to be more affordable housing for people who want to work and have lives and live in the city and be part of it. So they can be, this is a, what is that, baptism? No, what do you wish when you wear white? It's a baptism? Yeah. And kids just want to, want your kids, in place. You can live and be well. If you choose to raise a family, you can raise a family. You'll just have nice neighbors. Be healthy, learn, play. Play is instinct. And this is the sad thing, right? This is enough with the tragedies. There were so many tragedies with kids crying and they're wanting to borrow a camera to photograph their friend's funeral. There's enough tragedy. And here's a view from the school, because it's just another part of the American story, one little neighborhood, which I'm stepping back into. And think about it, how many people here are familiar with the work of Vivian Maier? And what do you find so intriguing about it? Someone who hasn't heard it, but somebody tell everybody else, why do we hear about Vivian Maier lately, or what do you know about her?
I believe it's the nostalgia of seeing her images, because she photographed during the 50s and 60s, and seeing them now, you have a view of the way things were then.
Okay, so Vivian Maier was discovered perhaps around 2 years ago by a guy, Maloff, who was looking through yard sales and tag sales and came across lots of negatives and started to get the essence that this belongs to one body of work. And he's found more and more and more and more, and she's a person who was born in New York, raised in Paris, came back, worked as a nanny for 40 years, and photographed. No one knew it, but when she wasn't being a nanny, and she was a nanny for many famous people, was a street photographer. And like how many of it, takes hundreds of thousands of pictures and never, today as far as people know, she never showed them in her time. And yet they were discovered. And this young man, who's a very sweet young man, has brought her work to light. And it's actually been deemed as not just a really great, it's a great story, but they're actually really great photographs. And perhaps think about it within each of us there's greatness that each of us have that we need to discover within each other, which I'm sure, and there's a body of work in every one of us here that is worthy of holding on to, sifting through and saying, I'm here, I see things, I record them, I witness them, and no, I haven't shared them yet as much as I like to, but why not? First of all, I want to thank you for your wisdom, your questions, for your bright eyes, for listening, looking. I am going to be having my first big show in Bushwick. It's opening June 1st. It's going to be, Bushwick itself is going to be like going to Mardi Gras. There are over 500 galleries, and artist studios open in the weekend. And this show is getting a lot of mention. I don't want to, German TV is going to film the opening, come. And there's going to be events. I mean, please come, you'll see things that you, but I'm saying it's a phenomena that Bushwick has become this intensive creative community. Thank you for calling.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.